it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. So, welcome, my dear friends, to this Sunday night special. A little preview of what I've got lined up next week for Halloween. This is going to be your special Halloween story. 3 hours of incredible entertainment. And what's more, it was co-written by me and the wonderful KB Hurst, also known as Black Friday's Witch. This is a project that we were working on together, last year, was it? I don't know, a long time ago, and it's come to fruition, so we're very, very proud that we're going to be presenting this to you on Halloween. Well, without further ado, here we go with the Fall and Rise of Reginald P. Errin, Part 1. The Fall and Rise of Reginald P. Errin. Part 1. In life, there's always going to be someone better than you. Someone more intelligent, more articulate, faster, more promising than you. You can't change it. Yet, what if you could? What if you could take all that has come before you and replant it in some form to make it perfect? Would you try? Would you want to make an effort? Would you be too cozy to carry out the final blow if it meant killing a part of yourself that you've grown accustomed to? Perhaps. Perhaps not. We adjudicate the probable outcomes in our lives, telling ourselves we did well, or we should punish ourselves by suffering flagellation of the mind. We provide ourselves with little anxieties to parade around, hoping somebody notices. Sometimes they do, but choose to ignore it. After all, we all have our own problems. Why do we want to suffer empathy? Why do we want to trudge along the path that we can no longer return from and get lost in a forest of thought filled with guilt and death wishes? Well, there's a trick to sanity, they say. I haven't been able to enact or teach like a university professor, always driving their students to push for better, for more significant than this life has to offer. Dry spells pulled by liquor never seem to be plentiful after the first sip. Our lives are every lustful fantasy of a married man for beauty or a woman for money, fundamental goals to achievement by nothing except black holes that suck up the light. Is this hell? We've lived in caves and milked our last cows. There's no milk to give. There's only prestige of the mind. It's what haunts us. It's what provides us with that gift of hope. What can we do today that we didn't do yesterday? We try to maintain our homes, our families, our identities like the Joneses, if even it is to our chagrin. There's a trick to this, Haven. If you just ask, you shall receive. The only devil is the one that lives in the mind of a guilty man. Men play God, judge, and jury. Inventions of liberty and patriotism to keep our wits about us make us think we're far more intelligent than those who came before us. As I said, there's always going to be someone better at our game than we are. So this story is of a man who tried to better his past, and in the end, maybe he's just a failure to himself, but maybe, just perhaps, he's the embodiment of a hero to all of us. Want to play a game? It was asked of our middle-aged Reginald, and of course, he succeeded in acceptance. And so it brings us to the beginning. There was a pond, smelling of death itself, and a man, perhaps guilty of love or lack of loving. Yet it stands, maybe to be corrected. Only he knows in the end. Won't you join us in figuring out this tale? The lake smelled of decay, Reginald thought, as he stood looking at its cold, quiet stillness, like a graveyard. After years of searching, could this be the location of the secret he'd been so desperately looking for? Just as he was pulling out the map from his pouch, He heard her voice. It was the one that had haunted his dreams for so many years now. He'd forgotten when it first came to him. "Why are you searching for my grave? I never loved you." The voice seemed to vibrate from the bottom of the lake. "You aren't real. You aren't my dead wife. Go away, demon." Reginald closed his eyes. The voice that had caused him to doubt himself was ramping things up now. He must be getting close. The voice vibrated into his ears, and the lake began to ripple. He pulled out his map, but lost it to a fierce wind that sucked it up into the sky. A mosquito landed on his forehead. Reginald ignored it, more concerned for the fact that his map was now gone. Although he felt like he'd studied the details 1,000 times, as soon as it slipped from his grasp, all he felt was a sudden sense of panic. That old man had been the first one to help him even begin to make sense of this whole unbelievable situation. The old man had told him it would be challenging, but that he would reap the rewards if he stayed the course. Reginald, trying not to lose hope, looked upon the lake, and that's when he knew he'd find it under the lake. Why else all the distractions? Without thinking, he dived into the cold water. Now, Reginald had always been a strong swimmer, so he instinctively knew that he could handle whatever conditions he would typically expect to find in calm water such as this. He realized quickly that this would be a challenge. As he swam towards the bottom, towards a large decayed door covered in rust, he saw the bodies of dead men all clutching the same door. His first thought was to turn back and swim to the surface, but then he remembered how far he'd come and how much he'd suffered. With one pull, he yanked the dead men's hands away from the door with all his strength, breaking their bones apart as he did so until he was able to pull the handle and the door opened. This moment was massive for him in his quest. Did he want to traverse a path where so many dead people had also dared to venture? Once he got the door ajar, he was shocked to find himself falling down a waterfall as the door slammed shut behind him. Reginald nearly choked on his bag that was wrapped around his neck like a noose as he gasped for air. He kept falling for what seemed like an impossible amount of time, although his thoughts remained focused on his ever-growing problem, a lack of oxygen. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he felt his body crash into a hard surface. After slowly taking the time to collect his thoughts and come to his senses, he looked around, trying to work out where he was. It was a dark cave. He took off the satchel from around his neck. He could see some light at the end of the cave. With no idea of where he was, how he got there, nor of how this cave could exist under the lake, he decided that logic would dictate his next move, and he would walk towards the light. He walked on further and further for what seemed like an eternity. Each time he got closer to the light, it evaded him. And then he heard a growl. The sound was coming from behind him, from the direction he'd entered the cave. Reginald looked back and began to wish he hadn't. What was before him was something that smelled like lake scum, and it didn't look any better. It had an octopus body, eyes like that of a hermit crab, a large stinger like a scorpion, but its mouth, oh, good God, its mouth. Something about this was wrong. The old man who'd given him the map had promised that he could find all the answers he sought by pursuing the light in the darkness. Reginald had a decision to make. Move forward towards the light and risk having to take on this abomination, or turn around and run. Reginald decided he would make a move and run for his life, and as he did, he realized he could be running towards his death. Either way, he instinctively knew that he had to do something, and this felt, for reasons he couldn't hope to explain, like the right move. When he approached the edge, he realized that the drop was steep. Well, he jumped anyhow, landing in thick moss. After everything he'd experienced in these tumultuous few minutes of his life, the softness of the landing and the relative calm of his new surroundings felt like nirvana. Reginald remained there for a few moments, his eyes closed. He could hear the monster in the distance, and yet he didn't care. Couldn't hurt him now. When he opened his eyes, he saw giant flowers everywhere. He was finally starting to believe the old man's doctrine. The answers you seek can be found by pursuing the light in the darkness. Reginald took a deep breath, looking up at the sky. Everything seemed so much more colourful now that he'd made it this far. He sat up and looked around at the world he found himself in. Hopping down onto the earth, he felt it ripple beneath him, as if he were standing on a waterbed. Looks could be deceiving, he surmised. As familiar as this might look, he was clearly in an environment different from any he'd previously experienced. Reginald moved slowly through the gardens, every step he took expecting something to come up and grab him from below. Something about this seemed familiar, more so than it should. He walked further down until he reached a path, recalling what the old man said about, no matter what happens, keep going. You must keep going. The path continued off into the distance as far as he could see. To see what would happen, he stepped off of the course. He felt that same waterbed ripple beneath him. And that decided it. Stick to the path. Reginald realized he was growing thirsty, now that he'd spent all of his energy on his survival. He pulled out his water jug, and as he took a swig, he felt eyes on him. Turning around, he saw eyes watching him. It was a small creature that seemed curious about what he was doing there. "Do you speak?" Reginald found himself asking this small animal. "Yes, my name is Topsio, and you don't belong here," the tiny creature said with a sinister grin. Despite this seemingly negative interaction, this was a good development. Solid proof in his mind that he was in an actual place that was ostensibly real within his plane of existence, and which contained sentient creatures that he could converse with now. The creature seemed to have a whimsical way about him. He flew up into the air and sat upon Reginald's shoulder. Reginald didn't know what to make of it at first. "Nay?" asked the tiny creature in a demanding way. Reginald." Reginald. Pleasure to meet you." "No, not Reginald. Just Reginald." "I know. I'm only teasing." This light gesture put him at ease, surprisingly enough. It was good to know that a sense of humor was a thing in this world. Reginald walked along while Topsio dangled his legs over his shoulder. "So, what brings you to the city of Karlov?" Reginald wasn't afraid to tell the little winged man why he had come so far. "Someone very close to me needs something from here, or else I may lose them forever." Well, it didn't draw much of a response from the creature, other than what looked to be a suspiciously knowing smile. Could this Topsio be of genuine assistance, or was he just an annoying distraction? Reginald wondered how much he should reveal to his new acquaintance. He walked on further, and then saw an area that didn't look so friendly. A large area of rocks and snags seemed to peek up from the ground, which now pulsated with a red liquid. "Why, I wouldn't go near there," Topsio said in a sing-song voice. He decided to trust the creature on this particular issue. The question was, could he find another way round? He paced back and forth for a moment. "Are you, looking for something in particular? Perhaps I can help you if you just tell me what it is you're looking for." Topsio flew off Reginald's shoulder, landing on a tree stump. Although he felt some instant bond of friendliness to this odd little creature, he wasn't yet ready to reveal too much of his story. How could he make sure he kept moving in the right direction without giving away too many details? Reginald just looked at Topsio. I'll know it when I see it, I think. Reginald didn't want to think of his life. How tragic it had been for 5 years since Marcella's death, his wife of 10 years. She'd suffered a cruel death at his hands. Well, it wasn't his fault, but he would always blame himself regardless. Marcella, what did he hope to find here that would possibly bring her back? If not that, then what could transpire that would bring him closure? Her death had been shrouded in such mystery that he'd always held a candle of hope that she was still out there somewhere, in some form. It wasn't until she passed that he realized how important his role as a father had become. Always away on business, never home. And then came the day everything changed. Marcella left this world, leaving a young daughter. How could he begin to relate to this child? He'd barely spent any time with her. Then, at 18, off to college. And then, that phone call no father wants. His child was found in an alley. Those disgusting men. What they'd done to her would haunt his nightmares. Then, sitting by her in the hospital bed, this was my punishment. I wanted revenge. I wanted to kill them. What would Marcella do? What words of wisdom would she offer me? What would she say to our precious Kayla? And that's when I met him, the old man. First, Reginald had guessed he was there to visit someone, most probably his wife. But he seemed to just be standing there, as if he was waiting for him instead. "Your daughter, Mr. Errin?" he asked, sitting in a chair across from him. "Yes." "She'll be okay, but are you okay?" Well, this question was the first time anyone had thought to ask Reginald about his feelings. For a moment he was utterly lost for words. "No," he replied. "Is this your daughter?" "Yeah. She was attacked on her college campus." Reginald had tears in his eyes. The old man looked at him with empathy. "You're a lost soul, one in need of salvation. Perhaps I can help you. You want revenge, don't you?" "Oh, I would crush those skulls if I could." "What if I told you there was a way to fix all of your problems, all at once?" "Why would you want to help me?" "I could hear your prayers." Who was this old man? Could he possibly be God, come down from the heavens to directly answer his wishes? He thought about this for a second. He had some pretty dark desires floating around in his mind right now. Would he want a benevolent God to be willing to grant him that which he so desperately wanted at this juncture in life? What would that mean for him as a human, and for our species as a whole? Reginald knew not to question it. Something inside him told him that much. Just then Kayla moaned in pain, her face bandaged and her jaw broken. The nurse came in and administered another dose of pain medication. She smiled empathetically at Mr. Errin and then left. "You, know a court system won't convict the men who did this." "What?" Reginald asked, annoyed. "It's the way the courts work. Even if they do arrest them, there'll be a trial, and your beautiful child will have to relay the details of every single thing they did to her. Do you want to know?" "Oh, no. It's bad enough in my imagination," Reginald said. "What if I could make it where it never happened? A way for all the pain of the last 5 years to never have existed?" "How?" "It's a gift. I'm giving it to you, but you must do everything I tell you to get it, and it won't be easy." "Why would you do this for me?" Let's just say I believe in paying it forward," he said with a look of sincerity on his aged face. Reginald then left his reminiscences and returned to the present. He looked around to try and regain his bearings. Everything was as it had been, but something felt different. He looked once more to Tapsio. He was quietly fiddling with something in his hand, and then looked up at Reginald. "You look disoriented." Tapsio then handed him something round. "What is it?" "Fruit, from our nimber trees. It'll help you get your bearings. Our world is not yours." Still not sure he could trust Tapsio. He took the fruit but smelled it first. Not that this would give him any helpful information. It didn't smell of anything in particular. What do I have to lose? He thought. Reginald ate the tiny round fruit, and at once he began to feel less tired. It was as if his gravity had lifted, and he could now see clearly. Tapsio seemed very pleased with himself. Feels better, doesn't it? Reginald nodded. While it did feel better, it also enabled him to see clearly. This strange world had secrets he was not expecting to find with the naked human eye. Reginald realized he was thirsty too. He saw a water source that seemed safe to drink. Tapsio stood by, watching him, saying nothing. You'll feel better now, I think, he quipped in his usual sing-song tone. Reginald stood, feeling exhilarated now and ready to move forward. In front of him, he saw it. There was a light shining at the edge of the dark forest. He was starting to understand the world around him. The fruit was, so far, edible, and the water was drinkable. He could now begin to formulate a way forward based on assumptions from the world he knew well. With this in mind, coupled with what the old man had told him, he felt that moving towards the light was a safe course of action. Reginald moved towards the edge of the forest, inching closer and closer to the light. It seemed to dim as though someone was switching it off as he got within a few feet of the end of the trail. It hung over a cliff, and as he peered down into a cavern, he heard it behind him. Tapsio looked scared and jumped up into the air and landed in a hole in one of the nearby trees. The earth beneath them began to ripple. It moved as though it were alive and breathing. And so it was. Just as he thought he was starting to gain a genuine understanding of this new and wondrous world around him, everything started to mutate again. Witnessing the content and felicitous Tapsio bail on him so quickly, and without even a glance back towards his newfound acquaintance, struck an unpleasant chord deep down within him. He experienced an overwhelming feeling of envy for the seemingly simple existence that this Tapsio creature was living. A cloud appeared suddenly overhead, and Reginald maneuvered his way down as best he could. He recalled the old man telling him that there'd be obstacles, but to keep going, and soon he would find the Tethys 13 instrument. The cloud was a fog that seemed to arrive from nowhere. He felt the air change, and his face felt like something was biting him. The wind moved in another direction, and the fog that carried with it seemed like tiny razors cutting at the leaves of the trees. Reginald wiped his forehead and saw blood on his finger. He looked around and found himself in deep thought. He recalled that day in the hospital again. "Let's go for a walk. My name is Harry Michaels. I'm here for my wife's chemo treatment, and now you look like you could use a coffee." "Well, there's a bar in the main restaurant," Reginald had said, sweating a bit. "Very well. Do you like vodka tonic?" "Very much," Reginald had said. And so off they went, together. There was something about Harry that had put Reginald immediately at ease. He guessed it was just the ease with which he could be around him without feeling any pressure to force a conversation. Well, he'd had supposed friendships that had gone on for years that never felt as comfortable as this did. He'd enjoy this drink. The bar was relatively empty, just a handful of people guiltily enjoying a drink, yet looking like they should be more concerned about the person they were here to visit. Harry displayed no such feelings as he walked up to the bar. So, tell me, how long have you been in a dark place? Reginald wasn't expecting the question and wasn't sure how to answer. I don't know how to answer your question, Harry, although I do appreciate the drink. You look at life with a blind spot. No hope, no joy, no satisfaction. He turned to the bartender. Vodka tonic for my friend here, and me, I'll have a double whiskey on the rocks. Top shelf only. Harry paid the tab and then looked back at Reginald, never skipping a beat. How long have you been this depressed and miserable? Well, you suck at being a dad, and you were a shitty husband. Your wife died because you didn't care to arrive home on time to administer her medication. You still feel guilty. All we did was fight. I didn't want to fight. Oh, Marcella had been able to administer her own diabetic medicine without me. She called me, pissed off, and I took my time that afternoon. God, I wish I hadn't been so selfish and angry. And now you're here because your daughter, whom you barely spent time with her entire life, was beaten, raped, and left for dead by some gang members. How does that make you feel, Reginald? Reginald had tears in his eyes. A deep, dark pain erupted, and he began to sob. Harry took Reginald into his arms and held him for a moment. There, it'll be okay. I'll help you make this pain go away. How? Reginald asked angrily. By making the past disappear. Giving you a rewrite. A way to change your past. How? Well, I need something retrieved for me. It's an instrument. Once I have it, I can make the pain go away. What is it? Oh, first you have to agree to it, Harry said, sipping on his whiskey. Reginald thought long and hard, and after all was said and done, he thought, to hell with it. What did he have to lose? He nodded at Harry. Ah, good. Shall we toast? Well, Reginald didn't feel much like toasting. He was nervous and fidgety. But he trusted Harry, a complete stranger. Now, can you tell me how you're going to fix it? Oh, all in good time. Finish your drink, Harry said to him. The rest of that evening passed pleasantly, which in itself was a cause for relief. Reginald was intrigued by what Harry had to say. However, he judged his words with a healthy dose of skepticism too. It seemed barely plausible and too good to be true. Well, he knew only too well about things that are too good to be true. Reginald remembered sitting in that bar that evening, thinking of his daughter, how much he had missed his wife no matter how faded their marriage had become. Harry stared at Reginald with the look of someone studying an experiment of his creation. Harry had known his pain. He knew it enough to recognize it in another human being. Reginald had a soul, a heart, even if it had no direction. Finally, Harry sat down his empty glass. I know this is a lot for you to take in, so let me share something with you. Harry touched Reginald by the hand, and he saw a flash of light. Then he saw a younger version of Harry cradling a woman who was bloody. There was another flash of light, and a man in a dark cloak, taking Harry by the hand. There was a device that looked like a compass with some numbers all over it, and with a timer. Then he saw Harry smiling. Then he saw him angry. Someone or something had stolen the device. Harry released Reginald's hand. It's called a Tethys 13, named after the oceanic goddess, he said. Reginald didn't know what to make of this. Regardless of how weird this encounter had been up to now, Harry's actions over the last few minutes had raised this to a whole new level of crazy. What exactly had he just witnessed? Well, there seemed to be images that defied logic, that traversed both time and space. What had happened to Harry? What was this strange device of which he spoke? Was this connected to what Harry had said about being able to help him? I can relate to your pain, as I said earlier. Someone gave me the gift I'm about to give you, but to do it, I need someone to get the device for me. It's in a place that's without logic. It'll be hard, but I have faith in you. Why me? Why do you need me to get this device? Oh, you're young and you can survive. I'm old and it'll be a wasted journey for me. I'll die before I make it back. You're smart and resourceful, Reginald. Just always follow the light within you. He then pulled out a map and handed it to Reginald. The map. Was it a grave error to have lost it? He hoped not, as it was too late to do anything to try and retrieve it. Well, it had got him this far. Perhaps that was its purpose. After all, it hadn't even hinted at the existence of this land in which he now found himself. He'd preserved an enormous mountain in his memory about the map that he had to cross to get to a dangerous region. Reginald hoped that he'd make it out of this place alive. He stood still then, overlooking the cliff, and in the distance he could see Devil's Peak. Ah, Devil's Peak. Did Harry have to spell that out in all capital letters on the map? He'd pondered that particular geographical feature on many occasions in the weeks and months between coming into possession of the map and beginning his quest. Still, the reality of this mountain hadn't even remotely hit him until now. Reginald stared out into the distance. It looked dark and evil. There was a dark cloud that covered the valley below it. How was he going to get down this cliff? He opened his backpack to look for the rope he'd thrown in at Harry's suggestion. Well, it was there, but he'd forgotten the rest of the mountain climbing gear. Oh, God, you're a real asshole, Reginald said to himself, punching his head in frustration. Oh, a 300-foot drop to his death, or walk back the way he came. But then, he felt the rippling earth. It seemed to groan beneath his feet, as though it were alive. A large wave of earth hit him, knocking him down flat on his back. And the ripple seemed to carry him down the cliff, as though he were riding a waterfall. A sense of calm came over him. He was neither moving excessively fast, nor was he endangered by any hazards during his descent. He even dared to take this chance to look around him and enjoy the admittedly glorious landscape. However, he still didn't look down. As safe as his downward journey seemed to be, he still had no great head for heights. He could nonetheless sense that he was approaching the ground, and finally dared to peek down. But the image that greeted him brought only a renewed sense of horror. Large plants that had thorns the size of Spanish swords. They were 3 feet long, with an outside casing that could slice you in half quite easily. Reginald learned this when his book bag hit one of the blade-like thorns, causing his bag's contents to fall out around him. But it wasn't the plants that caused the intense, almost paralyzing fear in Reginald. No, it was the creatures interspersed between each of the thorn-like protuberances. Every one had their eyes peeled on him, as if they were protecting something with their very lives. They didn't move. They kept unerringly still. He knew now that the next move was his. Reginald backed away, trying to steer clear of them. But it was of no use. Within seconds of them catching sight of him, one of the creatures leapt from its hiding place and placed a long, thin, grey hand on Reginald's thigh. Within moments, the creature had torn a hole in Reginald's jeans and ripped a layer of skin off of his thigh with its piercing razor-like tongue. It was an injury that would surely come back to haunt him time and again. Their eyes were black, metallic, their skin grey and wrinkled. They had no teeth. Instead, they had tongues that were abnormally long, with tiny, sharp ridges like you'd find on a steak knife. They were solid and agile creatures. They were 12 feet tall as their long arms grabbed Reginald, holding him down. Whatever these creatures were, the smell of blood caused them to go into a feeding frenzy. There were 3, now 4, no, a dozen, and they all began tearing apart Reginald's clothing, lapping up thin layers of skin and blood. There was something inside of their tongues, a venom, because Reginald felt no pain. However, the scream that came from his mouth almost ruptured his eardrums. Then it came back to him. What else had Harry said? What was it that he'd given him? That was it. Reginald reached into his inside pocket and pulled out the amulet. Harry had slid this across the table to him when they were drinking in the bar. It was circular in design, but parts were jutting out and looked like they connected to something else. Harry's precise instructions had been to keep this strictly guarded, and that it was to remain hidden, if at all possible. Only in situations where all hope was seemingly lost should Reginald produce it, and that in such instances the effects would be instantaneous. And so it was. At the mere sight of this amulet, it instantly repelled the creatures, and the path forward was clear once more. Reginald fell to the ground, breathing a heavy sigh of relief. But his joy was short-lived. From somewhere behind him came the unwelcome sound of slow, laboured handclaps. "Excellent, my new-found friend." It was Tapsio, back to taunt him. "So it seems like you're dealing well with the many secrets that Karloff has to throw at you. Pulling out the amulet to dissuade those carnivores from devouring you piece by piece was a nice move on your part. But I'm guessing that was a Hail Mary pass, the last throw of the dice. Am I wrong? The question is, are you now ready to leave the city limits and embark on the next stage of your adventure?" Reginald laid back, closed his eyes and drew a deep breath. What on earth had he gotten himself into now? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.